This is the In Focus podcast from The Hindu.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the In Focus podcast. I'm your host, G. Sampath.
And that's a little bit old, that chart. That chart's a couple of months old. And if you want to really see something that's said, take a look at what happened.
The assassination attempt on Republican nominee Donald Trump has skewed the American presidential race and in a manner that wouldn't please the Democratic camp. In his speech at the Republican National Convention that got over yesterday, Trump struck a fresh note, or so it seemed, when he stressed on unity. He also announced that Ohio Senator J.D. Vance would be his running mate as vice presidential candidate. And if two broad themes stood out at the Republican convention, they were unity, quote unquote, and the deification of Trump himself. Now, was the assassination attempt a factor in all this? Would Trump's former rivals have otherwise lined up behind him as they did so robustly? And with reports expected of Biden, reports suggesting that Biden might withdraw, how will the Democrats respond to this challenge? We discuss all these questions and more in this episode of In Focus, and we have with us Varghese K George, the Hindu's resident editor in New Delhi, who also recently traveled through the US on the campaign trail. Varghese, welcome back to In Focus, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Sambat, for hosting this and having me on your show. Thank you.
Great. So, Varghese, let's start with Trump's speech, which has been, awaited from the beginning of the convention. In fact, from the beginning of that gun event itself. What, to your mind, are the main takeaways from his speech at the RNC yesterday? I mean, do you see a departure? Do you see him saying things which he would not have said otherwise if it hadn't been for that, targeted ear incident?
Well, it's a mix of both. I mean, I am sure any human being would be who happens to be in that very rare occasion of near death would have come out of that experience as some kind of a changed person, which I think was largely speaking visible in Trump's overall approach in the aftermath of it. In my personal view, having observed Donald Trump's campaign for the last 9 years, I would say that he's toned down his extreme rhetorical flourish when it comes to dialing up anger and grievance. But that is not to overlook the fact that none of it actually means that he is abandoned his political agenda. What is political agenda? It is that an American identity, which he very clearly defines as there is a white nativist element to that thing. There is an element of Christian faith in that, and there is also a kind of isolationism or an economic nationalism that goes into it. So, on both these cultural and economic aspects of Trump's America First nationalism, this assassination attempt actually has only strengthened him, and the way it has only sort of enabled him to amplify that message even more stronger than it would have been otherwise, because that event of that assassination attempt actually gave him a godsend opportunity, I would say, because every speaker in the Republican National Convention practically attributed the escape of Donald Trump from the assassin's bullet to a godly intervention, to a divine intervention. So it gave him that opportunity to come out and portray the image of being a strong leader. That has always been his claim, that I am a strong leader who stands between you and complete apocalypse. So the fact that he very narrowly missed being dead on that evening in Pennsylvania, and the immediate reflex response that he demonstrated in the aftermath of that thing, which was to stand up and raise his fist and shout, fight, fight, fight. So this actually, I mean, I don't know, I mean, it almost appeared that it was too choreographed to be true. But had it not been for a bullet and an assassin and all that thing, one would very well think that this is the typical choreographed American public rally performance. But the fact that he was nearly shot dead actually gives a much needed and nearly absent credibility that Trump has lacked that credibility among a lot of independents, I would say. That his base was always his base. So what has happened is, because of the assassination attempt, his base is charged more than ever before on the one hand, and on the other, the fence sitters or the independents or the middle ground of American politics, who actually will decide the outcome of any election, including this one, they have more reasons to think that Trump is a leader.
Right. I mean, thank you so much for that, Varghese. I think you have touched upon a lot of very interesting and powerful points. I mean, just to quickly sum up what you just said. I mean, first, of course, you have said that something like this happened in someone's life. Close brush with death. It is, of course, bound to have an impact on how they live and how they, carry themselves afterwards. And you did say that he may have toned down his the extreme rhetorical flourish, but that doesn't mean he has stepped back from his core agenda of white nativism and its consequent cultural and political dimensions of it, isolationism abroad and the same kind of stances towards so-called quote-unquote outsiders within. And you've also made the point that it has this entire assassination event or the near assassination attempt has also strengthened and amplified this core agenda, while at the same time lending a kind of credibility to him. And of course, I mean, we have seen over the years how Trump has been portrayed, especially in the mainstream American media, as some kind of a buffoon. But I think it's going to be more and more difficult to sort of carry through that narrative with what has happened now. I think I see what you mean there, and also most importantly, you pointed out how this post attempt Trump version would also be more appealing in a way to the fence sitters, while at the same time charging his core voter base. I mean, all very big pluses for the Republican campaign, as also seen in the way many of his former rivals have come together behind him with not just endorsing him, but with a rousing endorsement. So even it's very clear that this assassination attempt has had a lot to do with that. But how would you characterize, Varghese, this change in persona? Is it really some change, which some transformation which you think has happened within Trump and his campaign, or is it more a change in messaging following the attempted assassination? Is it going to be a different public persona from now on? The meme, the one who is like a God's gift to satirists. Is that persona over? Is it going to be a different public persona from now on?
See, first of all, Sambat, it will be very difficult, in fact, nearly impossible to carry on with the idea that Trump is a buffoon, he lacks courage, or he lacks conviction in the aftermath of that shooting event, because of his response in the immediate aftermath and in the subsequent days. Unless you are an extreme Democrat partisan, nobody can, in their fair mind and independent assessment, uh, overlook the fact that Trump stood up. And when he stood up, his instinct was not to run. In fact, he repeatedly made the point, not only that his instinct was not to run, the people who were in that arena, nobody ran for life. So that is something which actually fires up what nationalists cause. Usually, it's a generic principle of nationalism is all about sacrifice for the nation and community, etc., etc. So that event in general and Trump's own response in particular actually sort of reinforces that claim. So far, it was only a claim. So there was a significant proportion of U.S. Public opinion makers who would actually, with good, sufficient recorded evidence, would suggest and demonstrate and argue that Trump's politics is all about himself and enriching his family and enriching his business. There are facts that support that claim. But in the face of death, somebody has actually managed to put up a different face, a different show, if you want to go that extreme. But even to do that in the face of death when death stares you in your face, is something remarkable, and nobody, I don't think, can take away that from Trump from now and the rest of his life, regardless of what happens in this election, because that image will remain one of the most iconic image of the century, I would say, or of the entire political history of the United States, because you have only a handful of attempted assassination or assassinations of US presidents and presidential candidates, and this actually will go down in history as one of those iconic, remarkable moments. Going back to one of those things that you summarized about the white supremacism and the white nationalism, so there is no doubt of the fact that all white supremacists in the United States are with Trump. But it will be very wrong for us. In fact, it will be very misleading and for us to assume that all the people who are voting for Trump are white supremacists. He got nearly 50%, half of United States voters in two consecutive election. It will be very, very wrong. In fact, I would say, self-destructing for his opponents to assume and make their strategies based on an assumption that all those nearly 50%, 1 in 2 in the US population, are white supremacists or nativist. That's actually the reason why American Democrats are unable to actually come up with a more structured, reasoned response to the issues that are actually firing up his base. Who are the speakers at the Republican National Convention? One of them, an Indian, Indian origin, Vivek Ramaswamy. What did he say about? I mean, what did Trump say about immigration? What did J.D. Vance say about immigration? What did Vivek Ramaswamy say about immigration? So all of them say one thing, which is that they make this clear demarcation. There will be a lot of dog whistling that might actually happen at various levels. I am not trying to overlook or ignore that thing, but the position is that immigration will have to be through legal route, and illegally entering people who are coming into the United States is causing a major problem. So from that level, there is a lot of conflating that happens, that okay, they link that crisis to a Democrat conspiracy, so on and so forth. But I don't think any reasonable politician on either side could argue with the fact that only people should only enter into a country through legal means, when unless the Democrats have a strategy to address that fundamental question. Just to,
But Varghese, when did Democrats ever say illegal immigrants are okay? Nobody says illegal immigrants are okay.
what then is the Democrat position? I do not know, because as we know, in under Biden, the Biden administration's record shows that on an average 200,000 people have entered the United States. So they have entered United States. So
But didn't they enter the United States even when the Republican administration was in place? I mean, is that something specific to the Democrat presidential terms? I
Yeah.
mean,
So yeah, when Trump was president, they got into what is called, they will push back part of them out at the border. Now, so that was Trump's policy. Now, if Democrats have a policy of not trying to push back, not send back people who are encounter the American border service, the terminology is encounter, essentially means that okay, you actually it can happen in two ways. Either they are pushed back, or they are admitted into the United States and then they put through a legal process or whatever within, once they are taken into the country. So under Biden's term, all of them have come in and they are in the United States. So Trump has a policy that we will push back, we will not let them come in. What is Democrats' policy on that? It's a major question that they have to answer. So some of these Republican governors have said, okay, the Florida governor, for example, he said, okay, I will take them all here and best them, and they'll send them to New York and Washington D.C. So these are issues you cannot really overlook and so to trivialize this issue by okay, Trump is an anti-immigrant, and therefore what are we? What is the Democrats? Are they for immigrants? Fair enough. So what do you mean? What is pro-immigration means? Do you think that okay, anybody can walk into the United States? Does border exist for the country? These are questions they have to answer. If they don't answer, you will have the Trump getting more and more support, and the only way one can resist it is to call all Trump supporters as some white nativist and racist.
Right. I mean, we'll come to the opponents or the Democrats' response and kind of what kind of a campaign counter they would have to formulate. But before that, Varghese, you referred to J.D. Vance, which is another big announcement of this convention. Vance as his running mate. Can you talk a little bit about what this means for American foreign policy? Because he's widely cited as someone who is opposed to the U.S. Aiding Ukraine in the ongoing war. And if JD Vance is going to be his running mate, and he will have a say, obviously, would that mean curtains for Zelensky, because his future depends on continued and heavy billions of dollars of American military aid to Ukraine. And also JD Vance in general, I think, is even more to the right of Trump in terms of in his outlook towards abortion, gun control, and so on. Isn't that true?
No, I would not go to, because that is a get again. The trouble is that American media space is so polarized that they have lost the capacity to process information in a fair manner. Now, JD Vance, as I wrote, and see, I hear about JD Vance for the first time in an interview that Barack Obama gave in 2016. He cited J.D. Vance's book to explain what is happening in Middle America. Why are the members of the white working class angry? What is alienating them from the US foreign policy and US economic policy? That was one reason why Trump was becoming popular. That time, Trump was not even popular to the extent that, okay, nobody was even thinking that he would actually make it to the Republican nomination, let alone become president. Barack Obama cited this book. Okay, here is a new Yale graduate who has explained it in very powerful manner. And that book was already getting into as a New York Times bestseller, and etc. etc. What was J.D. Vance's position on Trump in 2016? He said, here is a man who is unfit to be the president of the United States. He does not have the intellectual capacity to lead this great country. These were roughly the position of J.D. Vance. The fact that J.D. Vance is not today a Democrat, he actually ended up as Trump's running mate, is a testimony to the crisis of American Democratic Party, because any party that is interested in expanding its tent should have reached out to people like J.D. Vance, who were trying to look at their own communities and trying to explain what is actually happening in this community. So he's explained that in his book, he's explained that in the speech that he gave this week. Essentially, two things: his community, and many communities like that in the United States have been at the receiving end of two aspects of US policy. One is trade, runaway global trade that actually destroy domestic economy. So when you say domestic economy, the workers take the brunt of corporate profits. A company might be profiting by global trade. As I say, I mean, I've given examples in my reporting. When you, as an Indian, you might be very excited about the fact that, okay, so many people are going on H-1B visa to the United States. What actually happens is that an average Indian computer engineer goes to United States with a salary between 70,000 to 80,000 dollars. Invariably, he or she either, in some cases, actually replaces an American engineer whose salary is around $120,000. So even if she does not replace somebody, so she would block the possibility of an American worker to get in that thing. So suppression of wage has been at the core of global trade. Number one. So number two is American entanglements in global wars. Who are the people who are fighting these wars? The children of the same working class who are actually being pushed out of this so-called efficiency argument and the of global trade. So J.D. Vance is not merely a teller of that story as an outsider. He has lived that story. He was born to a single mother who was an addict, and he was raised by his grandmother, who was a Christian, as he put in his own words. He said, a Christian who loved her God but also loved the F word. These are typical, I would say, at the cost of being stereotypical, things that American heartland workers or people can associate with and relate with. So, in that sense, Trump was an outsider. See, Trump has not experienced any of these things because Trump was at any rate a beneficiary of global trade and all that thing, because he was a New York person who actually mingled more with the Democrats until he actually decided that he will become a Republican. He was a friend of the Clintons. He was largely a Democrat-leaning person all his life. He was an invitee to even Barack Obama's events at White House. So he turned Republican. Perhaps let us argue that he thought this is the most marketable political program, that political agenda that I could formulate, and he made a political career out of it. That could be okay, an uncharitable way, but still let us take that as an argument. But J.D. Vance has a legitimate claim to be the spokesperson of that grievance. And my assessment is that he actually represents that politics much better than Trump. I'm not really sure about whether he's on the right of Trump on any of those questions about abortion or gun control, etc. That one has to see, because I think he will formulate his policies more precisely. What we have seen trickling in the last few days are based on sound bites which are given by Vance at other occasions, not exactly addressing these questions, but passing reference to some of these issues. But yes, to the extent that his capacity to be a more powerful spokesperson and representative of the politics of grievance in the United States, which I say is largely legitimate grievance, I think Vance is more efficient and more is going to be more powerful than Trump has ever been.
Right. I mean, thank you for that, like a potted biography of J.D. Vance. Varghese, I think not many people in India would be fully aware of his background. But yes, it is, of course, a very plausible sort of explanation for his choice as well. He's been a champion spokesperson for the politics of grievance, especially of the American working class, which, as you rightly pointed out, has indeed suffered due to the migration of jobs away from white working class Americans. Who you spoke about H-1B visa. There's also been shifting of manufacturing outside the US. That too has played a role. But then, of course, a Democrat in a debate, let us say, would question, what is the solution that Trump has to offer, which is different from what American capitalism can live with, given the circumstances today. But that's another debate. But coming back to the opponent's response, which you just referred to earlier, now it does look like, to use an American phrase, the Republicans are sitting in the catbird seat with regard to the presidential race. It's theirs to lose, if at all. Now, how would the Democrats respond? I mean, we have seen reports today that there is a growing chorus among senior Democratic leaders, including Barack Obama and others, that Biden should withdraw, make way for someone else. And there are reports that he may not endorse Kamala Harris as such, but he might endorse an open kind of race where someone who will independently come up. Is that the right way to go? And if their way to make, if let us say a coterie of the elite in the party were to make a choice, that choice depend on how they're going to counter or challenge Trump's white nativist or white supremacist platform? Because someone like Kamala Harris would be a direct challenge, whereas someone who is white male, Newsom, for example, would be a different kind of approach. So, what are your thoughts on these choices facing the Democrats?
Well, I think Democrats have limited choice here because Democrats are also actually struggling with the burden of their legacy failures, a legacy of repeated failures, which is essentially they have lost the mooring of what actually their refusal to state upfront that what actually do they stand for. We actually pretty much know that they stand against, so they are against Trump. I mean, what was actually Biden's claim to legitimacy even in 2020? Why did all the the entire field of Democrat, the primary rivals of Biden, uh, sort of gave the nomination handed over to Biden, primarily because of the fact that they just wanted to defeat Trump, which they did. Now,
See, Varghese, let me just interject a little bit. I mean, of course, you are right in the sense their primary thing was to defeat Trump, but of course, they have to defeat Trump if they have to come to power. But their larger narrative was about saving, quote unquote, American democracy. That is
yeah,
what
that
they want democracy from the threat posed by Trump. That is, let us say, what they stand for.
I mean, so what is American democracy? I mean, all 4 years of Trump presidency, Democrats actually coined a slogan saying that not our president. They said that. So let us, we are not. See. Let us not fall for the Democratic propaganda or the Republican propaganda here. The idea of saving democracy. If you look at all the speeches at a Republican National Convention today, it is all about saving democracy and the U.S. Constitution. What is American democracy, who is being represented and who are represented? These are fundamental questions. In fact, when we are now on it, these are the questions that needs discussion. We should not actually fall into this propaganda that okay, there is somebody who is fighting for democracy and somebody who is an authoritarian. That is actually the US mainstream media's biggest narrative dexterity. I mean, we are told that okay, there is a war in Ukraine which is about democracy versus authoritarianism. The entire world is divided between authoritarianism and democracy, and within the United States, there is one group that is authoritarian and there is one group that is democratic. So that is actually too much of a simplified understanding of the complex, really fundamental issues that are confronting American democracy. American democracy is the best experiment, and we should not actually reduce that thing to a slogan that the Democrats are raising. Now that we are on that point, the very democracy argument is being raised by people who are saying that okay, the entire Democrat Party delegates have chosen, somebody citing around 13 million voters have chosen Biden as the candidate. Now the replacement of Biden through a non democratic process, so to speak, a council of the elders, council of wise men and women in Washington, D.C., this will actually come back to bite them. See, the problem is that there is a fundamental issue of credibility of the American electoral process, because if one half thinks that the other half is rigging it, when Trump won the election, they said, okay, Trump rigged it. Russians, Putin made him win the election. When Trump lost the election, they said Biden has rigged the election. So unless there is a common ground where you are not really questioning the process, you know that everybody has a fair chance as long as they can mobilize people's support. Those are the fundamental things that have been lost in this extremely polarized, acrimonious debate in the United States. I would, as an observer, I would say Democrats are equally, if not more, responsible for that chaos in or the loss of trust, popular trust in US electoral system and its democratic process. So now they are trying to deal with a person who came. I mean, Joe Biden was going into retirement when he came back, and you rightly put your finger on exact point when you said that for the Democrats to fight a Trump or any or the current wave of nationalism that is animating US politics, they actually need a white male to be at the helm. That is one of the reasons why Biden made it and many of his rivals could not make it, number one. That is also one of the reasons why Hillary Clinton turned out to be an ineffective candidate against Trump's emergence in 2016. So the even in Democrat part, either party, the fact of being a white male is an influencing or it's a contributing factor. I would say, I won't say it is the key determinant of an electoral outcome, but those things really would influence a small group of people. But as we know, some of the swing states actually swing based on 10,000 or 15,000 voters. So for Democrats, it is not going to be an easy decision to keep Biden or to ask him to get out and to have somebody else come in. All those decisions, I think, will be fraught with their own problems. But I think they will have to now deal with it, because as I think in New York Times somebody wrote, everybody knew one party would be faction driven when towards the election, and one party would be united. But nobody thought that the which party would be what. What we see now is a Republican Party that is united more than ever before, and a Democrat Party which is divided than more than ever before in the last 9 years.
Right. One last question, Varghese, before we wrap up quickly. So, I mean, you just spoke about how the one party being faction ridden and one party being united or unified. I mean, when nobody knew which one would be which, even 3 months back, but now it's very clearly the Republicans are really a unified force. They have lined up very strongly behind one person, whereas the Democrats are still sort of finding their way. So, as things stand, would you agree with some assessments which are coming out that this assassination attempt and the events thereafter has indicates that the Democrats are headed for a wipeout, no matter who they put up, or is there still a race to be had?
Well, as far as presidential election outcome goes, I think the edge that Donald Trump, uh, in my own assessment, even without the assassination attempt, he would have likely won. Because, as I said, when we talk about U.S. election, it's a big country, but essentially we're talking about election in five
When
or
you
six
when you
states.
travel through the swing states, is that the kind of sense you were getting?
Yes, I would very firmly say so because see the people. It's a standard political reporting 101. All what we need to do is that you ask 20 people who have voted for who they voted for last time and who they are voting for this time. So I would say there was a reasonable shift in favor of Trump already in states like Pennsylvania and Michigan, for example, two states I would very confidently talk about. Uh, I'm talking about only about a handful of people. We're talking about maybe a dozen people or 2 dozen people, but that I would say these are all indicative of where the political wind is going. So whatever has happened in the last month, that
So
I
does
things
it
that I
mean that you didn't find anybody or not many who said I voted for Trump last time, this time I'm going to vote for Biden?
far from it, and not only that, I don't find, I mean, I am just citing a very, as we speak, just a couple of hours ago there was an MSNBC black focus group discussion, only African American voters, group of people they put together. There is a drop, a 30 plus point drop in the support for Biden, as in 30 points shift from Biden to Trump among the focus group African American voters. That is massive. That is massive. And if you look at Trump's speeches, and all the speeches that they specifically address these two communities that they are always accused of being discriminating or excluding, which is African Americans and Latino community. Trump repeatedly addressed them specifically by name, and his vice president did, and many others did. So I think that is having an impact. It is not only my anecdotal stuff I'm talking about. I'm also giving you some data that are available right now.
Right. This African American focus group that you refer to is quite boggling the mind, so to speak. Thank you so much, Varghese. It was an absolute pleasure listening to you talk about the American presidential race, the Republican convention, based on your own travels as well as your observations since returning back to India. Thank you so much once again. Pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Sampath. It was a great pleasure. Hope to talk to you again. Thank you.
In Focus will be back soon with analysis of the biggest news issues. In the meantime, you can find our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and other platforms. Just search for In Focus by The Hindu. We'll see you soon.